Welcome back to Alcott Stories, where every tale is an unforgettable journey filled with emotions that speak to your heart. We're so glad you're here, and we hope today's story touched you as deeply as it touched us. In the world of love, betrayal, and redemption, there's always a story waiting to unfold, and we're honored to share them with you. So, grab a seat, settle in, and let's dive into the next chapter together. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps us bring more heartwarming stories to your screen. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new adventure here at Alcott Stories. We're so grateful for your support, and we can't wait to bring you even more emotional tales that will stay with you long after the credits roll. The grand ballroom of the Hilton estate glowed with golden chandeliers, casting a soft shimmer over the sea of tuxedos and elegant gowns. The air smelled of expensive cologne, delicate floral arrangements, and champagne bubbling in crystal flutes. Jackson Carter stood near the entrance, a glass of whiskey in his hand, exuding the quiet confidence of a man who was used to commanding rooms with just his presence. The powerful millionaire CEO was accustomed to shallow conversations, forced laughter, and eyes filled with admiration for his wealth rather than his soul. But tonight, something felt different. His sharp gaze scanned the crowd until it landed on her. She wasn't dressed in extravagance like the others, yet she owned the room. Amira Daniels stood at the podium, speaking with a conviction that sent ripples through the audience. Her deep brown skin glowed under the soft lighting, and her eyes burned with purpose, fierce and unwavering. She was young, but spoke with the wisdom of someone who had already fought battles and won. Jackson forgot to breathe. He had seen beautiful women before, but none like her. There was a fire in her that didn't flicker for approval. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply being herself. And for the first time in years, Jackson felt something stir inside him. As Amira spoke about justice, education, and empowerment, her voice carried a passion that made the audience lean in. But Jackson wasn't just listening, he was captivated. The way her lips curved around each word, the way her hands moved expressively, the slight crease of her brow when she emphasized a point, it was all enchanting. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, but Jackson was already moving. He needed to meet her. Amira stepped away from the podium, exhaling deeply. The speech had gone well, but she wasn't interested in mingling with billionaires who only cared about charity for publicity. She was here for a cause, not conversation. As she turned to leave, a deep voice stopped her. That was impressive. She looked up and met the eyes of Jackson Carter. Even if she hadn't recognized him from business magazines, she would have known he was powerful. He had a presence that demanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than her tuition. His sharp jawline, piercing hazel eyes, and the slight smirk playing on his lips made it clear he was used to getting what he wanted. But Amira wasn't easily impressed. "Thank you," she replied simply, turning slightly, signaling that she wasn't interested in small talk. Jackson chuckled, amused. Most people would have given anything for his attention, but she was different. "You believe every word you said up there, don't you?" he asked, stepping closer. She turned back, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Of course I do. Why else would I say it?" Jackson tilted his head, intrigued. No hesitation, no pretense, just pure, unshaken belief. "And you don't think some of these people like me, actually care about making a difference?" he challenged, raising an eyebrow. Amira folded her arms. "I think most of you care more about your image than actual change." Jackson laughed, a deep, rich sound that made a few heads turn. "Wow, You don't hold back, do you? I don't see a reason to, she replied, tilting her chin up. Jackson stared at her for a moment, something flickering in his gaze. Respect, amusement, a spark he hadn't felt in years. You fascinate me, Amira Daniels. She arched an eyebrow. I'm not here to fascinate you, Mr. Carter. The way she said his name, calm, unshaken, completely unaffected by his wealth, made something shift inside him. She wasn't like the others. And for the first time in his life, Jackson Carter fell hard. As the evening continued, Jackson found himself gravitating toward her. He sought her out in conversations, hanging on to her every word. He asked her questions about her law studies, her dreams, her fight for justice, and with each answer, he fell a little more. Amira, however, remained cautious. She knew his type, charming, powerful men who thought they could have anything, anyone. "Why are you talking to me, Jackson?" she finally asked, sipping her wine. He smirked. "Because you're the most interesting person in this room." She rolled her eyes. "Flattery won't work on me." "Good," he said, stepping closer, "because I'm not just trying to flatter you." For the first time, Amira hesitated. There was something in his eyes, something real. Still, she wasn't ready to believe it. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice softer now. Jackson studied her, his smirk fading into something more genuine. "A chance. A chance to know you. A chance to prove I'm not the man you think I am." Amira held his gaze, searching for any sign of deception. But all she found was sincerity, a rare, unexpected vulnerability in a man like him. For the first time that night, she smiled. Just a little. "One conversation," she said. "No promises." Jackson grinned. "I'll take it." And just like that, a spark ignited, one that neither of them knew would change their lives forever. That night they talked for hours, about life, ambition, dreams and fears. Amira saw glimpses of a man beyond the billionaire. And Jackson? He knew, deep down, that he would never be the same after meeting her. As the night ended, Jackson reached for her hand. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his voice unusually uncertain. Amira hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." And with that single word, she unknowingly set the stage for a love that would be tested, broken, and rebuilt in the most unimaginable ways. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes, it crashes into you, just like Jackson Carter crashed into Amira Daniels. And neither of them would ever be the same again. The days that followed their first meeting were filled with a tension Amira had never experienced before. Jackson Carter was everywhere. Not in the overwhelming, suffocating way men with too much power often pursued things they wanted, but in a way that was undeniably intentional. He wanted her, and he wasn't afraid to show it. At first, Amira resisted. She was a law student, drowning in cases, assignments, and long nights spent buried in legal textbooks. She didn't have time for romance, especially not with a man like Jackson, one who walked in billion-dollar circles and had the world at his feet. But Jackson Carter was relentless. A single text every morning. "Good luck in class today, counselor." A bouquet of sunflowers delivered to her apartment. "Because I know roses are too cliché for you." A handwritten note slipped into her law books. "I admire the way your mind works. You challenge me in ways no one ever has." It wasn't just the grand gestures that made her heart soften. It was the small things, the way he listened, the way he remembered the little details she didn't even think she had told him. And when they talked, it was never small talk. Late-night calls that turned into dawn, deep conversations under the stars, where he shared things he had never told another soul, confessions whispered in the dark, like secrets only they were meant to keep. It was terrifying how easily he slipped into her world, how effortlessly he made her feel like she belonged in his. "You're dangerous," Amira had whispered one night as they lay on a rooftop, watching the city lights flicker like stars beneath them. Jackson turned to her, his hazel eyes glinting with amusement. "Why?" "Because you make me feel things I'm not ready to feel." His smirk softened into something gentler, something real. "Then let me be patient." And he was. Jackson never pushed, never demanded. He simply waited, proving to her, day by day, moment by moment, that this wasn't a game to him, that she wasn't just another fleeting desire, she was everything. The first time he kissed her, it wasn't rushed. It was slow, deliberate. A question, not a demand. They had been sitting in a quiet cafe, sharing a plate of fries, when the world outside blurred into nothing. Jackson reached across the table, brushing a stray curl from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Amira," he murmured. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What? Can I kiss you?" The breath hitched in her throat. No man had ever asked before. They had always taken. But Jackson? He waited, and in that moment, she fell. When their lips finally met, it was like the universe had been holding its breath, waiting for this exact moment. Soft, slow, consuming. He kissed her like she was the only woman who had ever mattered, and when they pulled apart, Amira knew there was no turning back. Jackson had always known he would marry Amira. From the first moment he saw her, there had been no doubt in his mind. But Amira, she was still learning how to trust love. She had seen too many people fall apart, too many marriages that started with fairy tales but ended in broken promises. Could she risk it? Could she truly believe in forever? Jackson made her believe. One evening, under the soft glow of lanterns in a secluded garden, he knelt before her. "Amira," he whispered, his voice raw. "I've spent my life chasing success, power, everything I thought would make me whole. But the only thing that has ever truly mattered is you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want perfect," he continued. "I don't want easy. I want you, all of you, your fire, your passion, your stubbornness, your brilliance. I want to wake up every morning knowing that I get to love you for the rest of my life." Her hands trembled as he opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring, simple, timeless, just like their love. "I'm not promising a fairy tale," he said softly. "I'm promising us, messy, beautiful, real." A single tear slipped down Amira's cheek. And then she said yes, because she believed in their love. She believed in him. And at that moment, she had no idea how much that belief would be tested. Their wedding had been everything Amira had dreamed of, a small, intimate ceremony under the soft glow of fairy lights, surrounded by close friends and family. Jackson had looked at her with such adoration, such intensity, that she had known, without a doubt, that she was the center of his world. Their honeymoon was nothing short of magical. Days spent in cozy villas by the beach, long walks at sunset where the waves kissed their feet and the sky turned into a canvas of pinks and purples, nights filled with whispered promises, hands intertwined, hearts beating in perfect harmony. Every moment felt like a dream. In those early days, Amira could have sworn there was nothing in the world that could tear them apart. But soon, the honeymoon phase faded, slipping through her fingers like the grains of sand in her palm. It started slowly, small things at first. Jackson was always busy, too busy. He'd leave for the office early in the morning, long before Amira had even gotten out of bed. He'd return late at night, his eyes tired, his mind still absorbed in the deals, the contracts, the numbers that never seemed to stop coming. When he was home, he wasn't really home. Amira would cook dinner, setting the table with candles, hoping for a quiet night together. But Jackson would be glued to his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He'd barely look up as she slid into the seat across from him. His mind was elsewhere, always elsewhere. She began to feel invisible. When she finally tried to talk to him about it, her voice trembled. "Jackson, we never spend time together anymore. I feel like I'm losing you." Jackson's face softened with regret as he closed his laptop. He reached out for her hand, his grip warm, familiar, but there was a certain tension in his touch. "I'm sorry, baby. I've just been caught up with work. I promise I'll do better. I don't want to lose you." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a fatigue she couldn't ignore. "I just need you, Jackson," she whispered, her heart breaking. "I need you to be here with me, not just physically, but emotionally too." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I promise, I'll change. You're everything to me." For a moment she believed him, but as the days turned into weeks, the cycle continued. Amira tried to hold on. She truly did. She filled the silence with her own thoughts, her own ambitions, her own dreams. She threw herself into her studies, and when she wasn't buried in her books, she spent time with friends and family. But the emptiness in their home was undeniable. She woke up every morning, and he wasn't there. Sometimes, when she rolled over to his side of the bed in the middle of the night, the sheets were cold. The pillow hadn't even been touched. He was still at the office, still lost in the never-ending cycle of work. Amira missed him. She missed the man she married, the man who had promised her the world, the man who had vowed to love her for all of eternity. Where was he now? One night, Amira couldn't take it anymore. The loneliness had built up, becoming an ache in her chest that she couldn't ignore. Jackson had come home late again, and the silence between them was deafening. She couldn't stay silent any longer. "Jackson," she called softly from the doorway to their bedroom, her voice trembling with emotion. He had his back to her, his attention on his phone. "We need to talk." He turned around, exhaustion written across his face. "Amira, I'm tired. It's been a long day." "I don't care about how long your day was," she said, her voice rising just a little. "I care about you, Jackson. I care about us." He sighed deeply, setting his phone down. "What is it now, Amira? I'm doing my best here." "I'm tired of hearing that." Her voice broke and she struggled to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "I'm tired of being second place in your life, Jackson. You promised me we would make this work. But every day it feels like I'm losing you more and more." Jackson's expression softened, but there was a defensive edge to his tone. "I'm doing this for us, for our future, so we can have everything we ever dreamed of." "Jackson, I don't want everything." Her voice shook as she stepped closer. "I want you. I want the man I married, the one who told me that we could have it all, together." Jackson closed his eyes, frustration evident in his features. "I'm trying, Amira. You don't understand how much pressure I'm under. This company, it's everything. I can't just walk away." "I don't want you to walk away," she said quietly, her heart breaking in the silence that followed. "I just want you to walk back to me, to choose us." There was a long pause, and Amira watched him, her heart aching as he stood there, torn between his ambition and the woman he loved. Finally, Jackson reached for her, pulling her into his arms. He kissed the top of her head, whispering apologies as he held her close. "I'm sorry. I'll do better, I swear." But in the back of her mind, Amira knew. The cycle would repeat. Days turned into weeks, and despite his promises, nothing changed. The late nights at the office continued, the missed dinners, the forgotten dates. Amira had tried everything. She'd dressed up in her best outfits, hoping to spark his interest. She'd planned romantic evenings, hoping to reignite the flame that once burned so brightly between them. But nothing worked. The truth was, she was alone in the marriage. Jackson was physically there, but emotionally, he was somewhere else. Her heart ached with every missed touch, every ignored request for his attention. And as much as it broke her, she couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of the end? Was their love strong enough to survive the cracks that were slowly appearing in their once perfect marriage? It was a night like any other, except that it wasn't. Amira had gone to bed, as she always did, waiting for Jackson to come home. She told herself it was just another late night at the office, just another business deal that kept him occupied, just another excuse she had learned to accept in the name of love. But tonight was different. The clock on the wall ticked louder in the silence of their bedroom, the minutes stretching longer than they ever had before. Midnight came and went. Amira tried not to panic. She told herself she had no reason to. He was probably just caught up, wrapped in a last-minute meeting or making sure some deal went through. After all, he had told her this would be the last late night he had promised. But midnight turned into 2 a.m., then 3 a.m. The anxiety grew. What if something had happened? What if he was hurt? What if something went wrong? She grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed his number, only for it to ring and ring with no answer. Her heart skipped a beat, then raced. Why wasn't he answering? She paced their bedroom, restless, unable to sit still, until her eyes caught the time again. It was 5 a.m. The sun was starting to rise, casting a soft glow over the empty room. Amira sank to the edge of the bed, overwhelmed with a sense of dread that made her stomach turn. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Where was he? Just as the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, the door to their apartment creaked open. He was home. But something was wrong. Everything was wrong. Amira stood up so quickly that the world around her seemed to spin. She could barely register the figure in the doorway at first. Jackson's silhouette appeared in the dim light, his expensive suit looking rumpled and disheveled. His tie was loose and his shirt unbuttoned slightly at the collar. But it was the smell that hit her first. Perfume. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the floral fragrance she always wore. It was something entirely different, something foreign, something that didn't belong in their home, in their bed, in their life. Amira's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The man who had promised her forever, the man she had trusted with her heart, was standing before her, carrying the scent of another woman. He saw her standing there, her eyes wide with fear, confusion, and something darker, something heavier. I'm sorry, Jackson muttered, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in hours. Amira's blood ran cold. She could feel the room closing in around her, the walls growing tighter with every passing second. Where were you? Amira's voice cracked, the words barely a whisper, but they cut through the tension like a knife. Jackson's eyes flickered for a moment, as though he were trying to find the right words. There was hesitation, a long pause, and Amira's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she waited for him to speak. That hesitation told her everything. He wasn't just late. He wasn't just busy with work. He had been with someone else. Her legs felt weak, and she could barely stand. She held herself upright, her fists trembling at her sides, but the anger, the raw, gut-wrenching anger, coursed through her like wildfire. Where were you, Jackson? Her voice was louder now, trembling with hurt and rage. She took a step toward him, her chest rising and falling with every breath, the ache in her heart becoming unbearable. Why didn't you answer my calls? Why didn't you come home? I waited for you. I waited all night, like a fool. Jackson lowered his head, guilt flickering in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. Amira, he began, but the words hung in the air, useless and hollow. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she heard the truth. "Tell me, Jackson," she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. "Tell me what happened." Jackson sighed heavily and looked up at her, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. The silence between them was suffocating. I didn't want to hurt you," he finally whispered, his voice raw with emotion. Amira couldn't breathe. The words felt like a slap across her face. Did he honestly think this wasn't going to hurt her? Did you sleep with her?" Amira's voice was barely audible, the question hanging in the air like a poison. She could already feel the answer before he spoke. Jackson's eyes closed in shame, and when he opened them again, the guilt was written all over him. "Yes," he said, the word breaking like glass in the quiet room. "I made a mistake. I'm so sorry, Amira." Her world spun. She couldn't hear his apologies. She couldn't hear his regrets. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart shattering into a million pieces. "I trusted you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I gave you everything. My love, my trust, my heart. And this is how you repay me?" Her chest tightened as the tears finally spilled over. Jackson reached for her, but Amira stepped back, her hand flying up to stop him. "Don't touch me!" she screamed, the pain and betrayal laced in every syllable. "I gave you everything, Jackson. I gave you my soul, my loyalty, and this is what you do. You betray me with someone else." Jackson's face twisted with regret, and his eyes filled with unshed tears. "Amira, please forgive me. I don't know what I was thinking. I was stupid. No!" Amira's voice cracked, and her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling. "You don't get to say sorry. Not now. Not after everything. You've broken us. You've broken me." Jackson stood frozen, his face a mask of pain. There was no way he could fix this now. Not when he had destroyed the trust they had built together. Amira could barely look at him. The man she had once loved, the man she had given everything to, was no longer the person she thought he was. I can't be with you anymore, Jackson," she whispered through her sobs. The words felt like a death sentence, both for her and their marriage. Her heart was breaking. She had no idea how she was supposed to keep breathing, how she was supposed to move on from this betrayal. Jackson dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands trembling. "Amira, please. I'll do anything to fix this. Don't leave me. Don't give up on us." But it was too late. The damage had been done. The truth hung between them like a heavy, suffocating fog. Every time Jackson opened his mouth to speak, the words seemed empty, like they no longer carried the weight they once did. His apologies, his promises to change, it all felt hollow now. Amira couldn't believe him anymore. The pain that had once been a subtle ache in her chest had now consumed her, spreading throughout her entire being like a poison. The doubt, the betrayal, the loneliness, it was all too much. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't think. Every time she looked at him, all she saw was the man who had promised to love her forever and had broken that promise, leaving her heart shattered in pieces. "Amira, please," Jackson pleaded, his voice raw with emotion. "I swear to you, I didn't cheat on you. I made a mistake. I got lost in my work, in my own problems. But you are the one I love. You're the only one I want." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away sharply, her gaze cold and distant. "I don't know what you want from me, Jackson," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "You've already shown me who you are. All of your lies, your excuses, they don't mean anything anymore." The walls she had built around her heart were high and thick now. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to feel this pain anymore. Jackson's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Amira, please don't do this. You're everything to me." "I was everything to you," she whispered, the tears spilling over before she could stop them. "But not anymore. You made sure of that." Her voice cracked as she looked at him, her heart breaking all over again. How could she have loved someone who could betray her so easily? Amira turned away from him, unable to bear the weight of his gaze any longer. She stared out the window, watching as the first light of dawn crept across the sky. It should have been a moment of beauty, but all she could feel was the suffocating weight of the choices she had to make. Could she really walk away from everything she had ever wanted? She had trusted him. She had loved him with every piece of her being, had given him everything she had. And now she had nothing left to give. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered again, her voice barely a breath. Jackson's face contorted with anguish. "Please, Amira, don't say that." But Amira was done. The doubt that had consumed her, the pain that had twisted inside her heart, had finally reached its breaking point. She couldn't keep living like this. "I want a divorce," she said, her voice steady despite the tears flowing down her cheeks. The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His chest constricted as though someone had taken all the air from the room. He felt dizzy, lightheaded. He hadn't thought it would come to this. "No, no, Amira, please!" Jackson begged, his voice cracking with the weight of his desperation. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out to her again, but she stepped back, her eyes filled with both pain and resolve. "Don't touch me," she said quietly. "I don't want you to touch me." Jackson's world seemed to shatter in that moment. His mind raced, and he could feel the tears that burned in the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He couldn't. He had to fix this. He had to fix her. "I don't want a divorce," he said, his voice hoarse. "I love you, Amira. Please don't do this. I'll change. I'll be the man you need me to be. I'll be better, I promise." But Amira was already walking away from him, her footsteps quiet but heavy, each one echoing in his heart. The silence between them was deafening. It stretched on for what felt like hours, as Amira sat on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap, staring down at the floor. Jackson stood in the middle of the room, unable to move, unable to speak, his mind reeling. Amira's words echoed in his mind over and over again. "I want a divorce." His heart clenched. He had done it. He had ruined everything. He had pushed her away so far that she could no longer see the man she had once loved, the man he had once been. Jackson couldn't understand where things had gone wrong. How had he let it get this bad? But as he looked at Amira, he finally saw the truth. He had taken her love for granted. He had neglected her, hurt her, broken the promises he had made her. All the while, he had been too blinded by his own ambitions, his own fears to see what he was losing. And now, it was too late. Jackson sank to his knees before her, the weight of his failure crashing down on him like a tidal wave. His chest tightened with a pain he had never known. He had been so focused on everything else, his company, his career, his image, that he had forgotten the one thing that mattered most. Her. "I'm sorry, Amira," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to lose you." But Amira didn't answer. She just kept looking down, tears streaming down her face. She was done. She had already made up her mind. The trust had been broken beyond repair. Jackson sat there staring at her, waiting for some sign that she still cared, still loved him. But there was nothing. Nothing but silence. Amira's voice was soft, but firm. "I want a divorce, Jackson. You hurt me. You lied to me. I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, who doesn't see me." The pain in her voice was unbearable. He had broken her heart so many times, and now it was beyond fixing. She had given him all of herself, but he had failed her. "Goodbye, Jackson," she whispered, her voice shaking. Jackson stood up slowly, as if each movement took all the strength he had left. "Goodbye." The word echoed in his mind, like a death sentence to the love he thought would last forever. And as she turned and walked out of the room, Jackson collapsed onto the floor, his heart heavy with regret, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The woman he loved was walking away, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. The mansion that had once been their sanctuary, a home filled with love and laughter, now stood eerily silent. Every room seemed hollow, every corner vacant of the warmth it once held. The scent of Amira's perfume, the soft sound of her voice, the touch of her hand. It was all gone. Jackson sat in his office, the one place where he used to feel most at home, but now it felt like a prison. His desk, piled high with contracts and documents, seemed more like a mountain he couldn't climb. The phone calls, the meetings, the back-to-back deals, it all felt irrelevant, inconsequential. He had everything, but without Amira, it felt like nothing. It had been weeks since Amira had left, but the ache inside Jackson hadn't faded. If anything, it had only deepened. He sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen, the words and numbers blurring into nothingness. His mind kept drifting back to her, the way she looked when she asked for the divorce, the way her eyes had shimmered with both pain and finality, the words she'd said to him. "I want a divorce, Jackson," played over and over in his head, each time sounding louder, harsher. There had been no argument, no long drawn-out fight. It was the quiet resolve in her voice, the calmness in her decision that had truly broken him. She had already let go. She had already moved on. And Jackson, he was still stuck, unable to move past his own mistakes, his own regrets. Every night, when he lay in bed, his mind replayed their last conversation in vivid detail. The look of betrayal in Amira's eyes, the way she had pulled away from him, the sting of her words. He could still feel the emptiness of her absence, the way it consumed every inch of their once shared space. He could no longer find peace in the life he had built for himself. "Where did I go wrong?" Jackson muttered to himself, his fingers running through his hair as he paced the room. Why didn't I see it? Why didn't I fight harder for her? He had spent so much of his life building an empire, pursuing success and wealth, but all of it felt so trivial now. He had been blind to what truly mattered. He had thought he could win her heart through lavish gifts, through grand gestures, but it was never about that. It was always about the little things, the quiet moments, the promises kept, the love shown in the everyday. But he had failed. Jackson's mornings started the same way. Waking up alone in their large, empty bed, surrounded by silence. He couldn't remember the last time he had slept peacefully, the darkness of regret clouding his thoughts even as he tried to focus on work. He had built an empire, but now it felt like it had no foundation. Without Amira, none of it mattered. There were no phone calls from her anymore, no sweet text messages asking how his day was going. The echoes of her absence were so loud in his ears they drowned out the sound of his own thoughts. He would drive to the office in the morning, but his mind was miles away. He would sit through meetings, but he couldn't concentrate. He found himself picking up his phone, then putting it down again, over and over, hoping for a message from her. Anything, even a single word. But nothing came. She was gone. Jackson couldn't escape the guilt. It gnawed at him constantly, a hunger he could never satisfy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the way her eyes had filled with tears, the way her voice had broken when she told him it was over. Why hadn't I seen it? He could have stopped it. He could have been there for her when she needed him, instead of chasing after success, after power. He had thought that making money and closing deals would bring them happiness. He had believed that his world would be complete once he built the life he had dreamed of. But now, without Amira beside him, it was all a hollow victory. Jackson's mind kept circling back to the same question. Why didn't I fight for her? She had told him everything she needed. She had asked for his attention, his presence. She had begged him to show up, to be there, to choose her over the endless chase for success. And Jackson had ignored her. He had been too focused on proving himself, on building an empire, on everything that didn't matter in the end. Jackson knew he had made mistakes. Big mistakes. But the hardest part was accepting the possibility that it might be too late to fix them. He could feel her slipping away from him, like sand running through his fingers. She was no longer the woman who had eagerly awaited his arrival at the end of the day. She was no longer the woman who had held his hand through the toughest times. She had become a distant memory, and the thought of losing her forever made his heart ache in ways he couldn't describe. Had he destroyed it all? He had been so careless with her heart, so reckless with the love they had shared. Now, all he had left were the haunting words she had said to him, "I want a divorce." Those words followed him everywhere. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't escape the weight of his own failure. Days bled into one another, each one more unbearable than the last. Jackson spent his time desperately trying to fix everything he had broken, but it all felt futile. He had been a fool to think he could live without her. Now, all he could think about was how to get her back, how to prove to her that he could change. But how could he prove it? How could he show her that he was truly sorry for all the ways he had let her down? He knew he had to make amends, but he didn't know if it was even possible anymore. The hurt ran too deep. One night, as Jackson stood in the silence of the mansion, staring out the window, he made a promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to win her back. He would fight for her, for the woman who had once been his everything. He wouldn't let her go without showing her that he could be the man she needed him to be. But could he ever make her believe in him again? He didn't know. All he had were his regrets, his pain, and the flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. But that hope was fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. It was all he had left. Jackson Carter had always been a man who prided himself on his determination. The world knew him as a powerful, driven millionaire, CEO who got what he wanted, whether it was closing multi-million-dollar deals or expanding his empire. He never backed down from a challenge. But this time, the challenge was different. This time it was not about business. It was about love. It was about Amira, and he couldn't afford to lose her. Days had passed since Amira left, and every moment without her felt like an eternity. Jackson's mind was consumed with thoughts of her smile, the way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams of becoming a lawyer and fighting for justice. He couldn't let go of the image of her, of the woman he had let slip through his fingers. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. All he could do was think about how he had failed her, how he had taken her love for granted, how he had let everything he valued in life slip through his hands. The man who had once been so confident, so assured, now felt broken, lost. Jackson knew he had to try something. He had to fight for her. The next morning, he called the finest florist in town and ordered a bouquet of roses so beautiful they could have been plucked from the Garden of Eden itself. He spent hours choosing the perfect card, writing words from his heart, words that spoke of his regret, his longing, and his hope. "Amira, I'm sorry. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Please come back to me. I love you." When the flowers arrived at her apartment, Jackson felt a flicker of hope, but that hope was short-lived. Hours later, he received a call from the florist. The flowers had been returned. They had been sent back. Jackson's heart sank. The rejection stung more than he expected. It felt like a dagger to the chest. The cold reality that Amira was no longer interested in his gestures, no longer interested in his apologies, but he couldn't give up. He wouldn't. Desperation clouded his judgment, but Jackson didn't care. He picked up his phone and dialed her number again, and again, and again. No answer. He left messages. He poured his heart out in each voicemail, his voice shaky with emotion, pleading for her to listen. He told her that he would wait for as long as it took. "Amira, please, just give me a chance to explain. I love you more than you could ever know. Please don't shut me out. Please don't leave me like this." But every voicemail went unanswered. Every call was rejected. The woman who had once been so warm and loving, the woman who had answered every call with excitement in her voice, was now gone. Jackson couldn't stop. He couldn't stop calling, couldn't stop hoping that one day she would pick up. But each time he was met with silence. And with every unanswered call, the weight of her rejection grew heavier. Jackson couldn't sit idle any longer. He needed to see her. He needed to hear her voice. So one day, against his better judgment, he decided to show up at her law school. He knew it was risky, but he couldn't stay away. He had to try. If she wouldn't come to him, he would go to her. He parked outside the campus, his heart racing. He was nervous, more nervous than he had ever been in his life, but he was determined. He stood at the entrance, waiting for her to appear. She had become a distant memory, and the thought of losing her forever made his heart ache in ways he couldn't describe. Had he destroyed it all? He had been so careless with her heart, so reckless with the love they had shared. Now, all he had left were the haunting words she had said to him, "I want a divorce." Those words followed him everywhere. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't escape the weight of his own failure. Days bled into one another, each one more unbearable than the last. Jackson spent his time desperately trying to fix everything he had broken, but it all felt futile. He had been a fool to think he could live without her. Now, all he could think about was how to get her back, how to prove to her that he could change. But how could he prove it? How could he show her that he was truly sorry for all the ways he had let her down? He knew he had to make amends, but he didn't know if it was even possible anymore. The hurt ran too deep. One night, as Jackson stood in the silence of the mansion, staring out the window, he made a promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to win her back. He would fight for her, for the woman who had once been his everything. He wouldn't let her go without showing her that he could be the man she needed him to be. But could he ever make her believe in him again? He didn't know. All he had were his regrets, his pain, and the flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. But that hope was fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. It was all he had left. Jackson Carter had always been a man who prided himself on his determination. The world knew him as a powerful, driven millionaire, CEO who got what he wanted, whether it was closing multi-million-dollar deals or expanding his empire. He never backed down from a challenge. But this time, the challenge was different. This time it was not about business. It was about love. It was about Amira, and he couldn't afford to lose her. Days had passed since Amira left, and every moment without her felt like an eternity. Jackson's mind was consumed with thoughts of her, her smile, the way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams of becoming a lawyer and fighting for justice. He couldn't let go of the image of her, of the woman he had let slip through his fingers. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. All he could do was think about how he had failed her, how he had taken her love for granted, how he had let everything he valued in life slip through his hands. The man who had once been so confident, so assured, now felt broken, lost. Jackson knew he had to try something. He had to fight for her. The next morning, he called the finest florist in town and ordered a bouquet of roses so beautiful they could have been plucked from the Garden of Eden itself. He spent hours choosing the perfect card, writing words from his heart, words that spoke of his regret, his longing, and his hope. "Amira, I'm sorry. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Please come back to me. I love you." When the flowers arrived at her apartment, Jackson felt a flicker of hope, but that hope was short-lived. Hours later, he received a call from the florist. The flowers had been returned. They had been sent back. Jackson's heart sank. The rejection stung more than he expected. It felt like a dagger to the chest. The cold reality that Amira was no longer interested in his gestures, no longer interested in his apologies, but he couldn't give up. He wouldn't. Desperation clouded his judgment, but Jackson didn't care. He picked up his phone and dialed her number again, and again, and again. No answer. He left messages. He poured his heart out in each voicemail, his voice shaky with emotion, pleading for her to listen. He told her that he would wait for as long as it took. "Amira, please, just give me a chance to explain. I love you more than you could ever know. Please don't shut me out. Please don't leave me like this." But every voicemail went unanswered. Every call was rejected. The woman who had once been so warm and loving, the woman who had answered every call with excitement in her voice, was now gone. Jackson couldn't stop. He couldn't stop calling, couldn't stop hoping that one day she would pick up. But each time he was met with silence, and with every unanswered call, the weight of her rejection grew heavier. Jackson couldn't sit idle any longer. He needed to see her. He needed to hear her voice. So one day, against his better judgment, he decided to show up at her law school. He knew it was risky, but he couldn't stay away. He had to try. If she wouldn't come to him, he would go to her. He parked outside the campus, his heart racing. He was nervous, more nervous than he had ever been in his life, but he was determined. He stood at the entrance, waiting for her to appear. But the one that made her pause was a photo of their wedding day, the day they had both vowed to love each other forever. She traced the edges of the photograph with her fingers, remembering how she had felt that day, how they had promised to never let go. How could that day feel so far away? She flipped through the pages, each one tugging at her heart, until she came to the final page, a page that was empty except for a letter. Her hands shook as she picked up the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, Jackson's. "Amira, I failed you. I let my ambition blind me, and I broke the most precious thing I ever had, us. I never betrayed your love, but I betrayed your trust. And that is the worst sin of all. I don't deserve you, but if there's even a sliver of a chance, please let me fix this." Amira's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. Each line felt like a dagger to her heart, and yet somehow it felt like a balm to her soul. "Amira," he continued, "I know I can't undo what I've done. I can't change the past. But please know that every day without you has been a reminder of how wrong I was. You are the most important person in my life, and I'm so sorry for losing sight of that. I know I can never make up for what I've done, but if you'll give me the chance, I'll spend the rest of my life trying. I love you more than I ever thought possible, and I'll never stop fighting for us. Please, if there's even a chance, let me fix this. Let me show you who I can be for you. For us." The words were raw, vulnerable, and so filled with regret. Amira felt the weight of them in her chest, the ache of his confessions settling over her. She had wanted this. She had wanted him to admit his mistakes, to acknowledge the pain he had caused her. But now that it was here, in black and white, she didn't know how to feel. Tears welled up in her eyes as she finished reading the letter. She didn't even notice the raindrops continuing to batter against the window. the storm outside mirroring the storm inside her heart. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, each thought colliding with the next. Could she forgive him? She wanted to. She wanted to believe that the man who had written this letter, the man who had poured his heart into these words, was the man she had once loved, the man who had held her close during their happiest moments. But the pain of the betrayal, the loneliness, and the heartache she had felt over the past few weeks were still fresh. Her trust had been broken, and trust was something that wasn't easily repaired. But Jackson's words were genuine. She could feel it. His regret was palpable. He wasn't just apologizing because it was the right thing to do. He was apologizing because he had truly come to understand the depth of his mistakes. The man she had loved, still loved in a way, had changed. He wasn't the same person who had neglected her, who had let work and ambition consume him. Could she allow herself to hope again? Amira wiped away the tears that had fallen onto the letter. She folded it carefully, placing it back in the scrapbook before closing the book with a soft thud. The decision was hers, and only hers. The road ahead wasn't clear. Forgiveness wasn't a switch she could flick on. It was a journey, and it would take time. But one thing was certain. Jackson's grand gesture, his heartfelt confession, had opened a door she hadn't thought she could walk through again. Jackson Carter had always been a man who thrived on control. Control of his business, control of his empire, control over every aspect of his life. But when it came to Amira, control had slipped through his fingers like sand. He had thought he could balance it all, his career, his ambition, and the love of his life. He was wrong. He had chosen the wrong priorities, and in doing so, he had lost her. But now, he was determined to prove that love was worth fighting for. He was willing to do whatever it took, not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with genuine actions, ones that would show Amira that he had truly changed. He knew that love wasn't just about words. It was about consistency, effort, and the willingness to grow together. Jackson knew the changes wouldn't be easy. He had built his life around work, sacrificing relationships, family, and even himself to build his empire. But as he sat alone in his office late one night, staring at the stacks of papers and reports, something inside him shifted. The numbers and spreadsheets no longer held the same significance they once did. What good was all of this if it meant losing the person who had made him feel truly alive? The next day, Jackson made a decision that would change everything. He called his assistant and cleared his calendar. He would no longer work late into the night. He would set boundaries. No more late-night meetings. No more putting business before the woman he loved. It was time to rebuild his life, time to focus on what really mattered. But it wasn't just about changing his schedule. It was about changing his mindset. Jackson sought therapy, something he had never considered before. He had always been a man who kept his emotions bottled up, believing that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness. But Amira had shown him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was through vulnerability that true healing could begin. As Jackson sat in therapy sessions week after week, he came to realize how much emotional neglect he had inflicted on Amira. He had buried his feelings under the weight of ambition, neglecting her needs, her desires, and her heart. He saw how he had failed her, not just through his actions, but through his inaction. He had taken her love for granted, thinking it would always be there, no matter how much he ignored her. The more he reflected on his mistakes, the more he understood how deeply he had hurt her. He didn't just hurt her physically by being absent. He hurt her emotionally by being distant, cold, and unavailable. Amira deserved more than that. She deserved his full attention, his respect, and his unwavering love, and Jackson was ready to give her that. He was ready to prove that he was capable of being the man she deserved. Days passed, and Jackson's life began to transform. He was present for the people around him, especially for Amira, but no matter how much progress he made, one thing remained. He still hadn't won her back. She was still distant, still unsure, still grieving the loss of the man she once trusted. Jackson knew he had to take one final step, a step that would show Amira that he was truly willing to fight for her. It was time for the final test. One cold evening, after the sun had set and the city was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, Jackson stood outside Amira's apartment building. His heart raced in his chest, his palms clammy with nervousness. In his hand, he held a single white rose, symbolizing purity, new beginnings, and the love he had for her. He knocked on her door. His knuckles made a soft sound that echoed in the quiet hall, but the moment felt like an eternity. He could feel his breath catch in his throat, his thoughts a whirlwind of hope and fear. When Amira opened the door, her eyes immediately met his, and for a brief moment, Jackson felt his heart stop. She looked as beautiful as ever, her hair cascading down her shoulders, her dark eyes holding a depth of emotion he couldn't quite decipher. But it wasn't just her beauty that stopped him, it was the way she looked at him. It wasn't with disdain or anger, it wasn't with indifference. It was as if she was looking for something he wasn't sure he had shown her yet. Jackson's heart pounded as he held out the white rose. He didn't need to speak yet. The gesture alone was enough. It was everything he had to offer in that moment, his sincerity, his heart, his unwavering commitment to her. "Amira," he began, his voice shaky but resolute. "I've hurt you. I've let you down in ways I never imagined possible. I was selfish, blind, and I let my ambition take over everything. I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused you." He paused, taking a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. "But I'm here now. I've changed. I will continue to change. And I'm asking you to give me a chance. Please tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll spend forever making this right. I'll spend forever proving to you that I am the man you deserve." For a moment, there was silence. Amira stood still, her eyes searching his face. Was this real? Was he truly changed? Was he the man she had always dreamed of, the man who could truly love her without distractions, without excuses? And then, the walls she had built so carefully, brick by brick, began to crumble. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months, and in his eyes she saw something she had longed to see. She saw the man who had once loved her, with an intensity that had burned brighter than anything else in his life. She saw his vulnerability, his regret, his hope. She saw the man she had fallen in love with, the man she wanted to believe in again. Amira stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she held the rose in her own hands. Her heart was torn between the past and the future. She wanted to believe him, she wanted to trust him, but how could she let go of the pain, the disappointment, the fear that had followed her for so long? Could love heal all wounds? She searched his eyes again, looking for any sign that this wasn't just another fleeting moment. And then she found it. The sincerity in his gaze, the quiet desperation in his voice. For the first time in a long while, Amira felt the stirrings of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Maybe they could rebuild what they had lost. "I don't know," Amira said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can just forget everything. I don't know if I can trust you again." Jackson nodded, his face softening. "I don't expect you to forget, Amira. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that I am not the man I was. I will spend every day showing you that you can trust me again." Amira looked at him for a long time, her heart torn between the fear of getting hurt again and the hope that he might truly be the man he promised to be. But in that moment, she realized something. Love wasn't easy. Love was messy. It was complicated. But love was worth fighting for. With a deep breath, Amira finally spoke. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Jackson. Let's see if we can fix this. Together." Jackson's face lit up with relief, his heart soaring. He stepped forward, gently taking her hand in his. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it together. Amira sat on the edge of her bed, the room bathed in the soft golden light of the afternoon sun. Her heart was racing, her thoughts swirling. Jackson stood in front of her, his face full of hope and desperation. The air between them was thick with emotion. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure what the future would hold. Could love really heal the wounds he had caused? Her fingers clutched the hem of her sweater, a subconscious way to ground herself in the midst of the storm raging within her heart. Could she truly allow herself to love him again? Jackson had done everything right. He had changed his schedule. He had sought help to work on his emotional neglect. He had taken responsibility for his mistakes, and he had shown up over and over again. But actions weren't enough. She needed more. She needed something deeper. She needed a promise, a guarantee that this time things would be different. "I don't want grand gestures, Jackson," Amira said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was simply tired of the uncertainty, tired of feeling like she was just a temporary part of his life. "I want consistency," she continued, her eyes never leaving his. "I want a husband who chooses me every day, not just when he's afraid to lose me." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jackson's heart clenched at her vulnerability. It wasn't about expensive gifts or romantic gestures anymore. It was about showing up for her every day. It was about proving that even when things got hard, he would always choose her, always put her first. That's what she deserved. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I'm sorry. I didn't see it before. I didn't realize what I was doing to you." He paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "I didn't just neglect you. I neglected us. I was so consumed with work and building my empire that I forgot what truly mattered, and now I know what I have to do." Jackson took a deep breath and stepped closer, his gaze softening as he looked into Amira's eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for hers, holding them gently in his. He had never felt more vulnerable than he did in this moment, standing before the woman he loved, trying to make her believe that he had truly changed. "Amira," his voice was low, shaking with raw emotion. "Let me prove it. Not in a day, not in a week, but for the rest of my life I will choose you. I will choose us. I will be the man you deserve. I will show you that love is not just something we say, it's something we do every day." Amira's breath caught in her throat, her eyes searching his face. She had heard these words before, years ago on their wedding day. She had believed him then, with all her heart. But the man who had stood before her that day was not the man who had walked away from her so many times since. Could she believe him now? Could she trust that he meant every word he was saying? She took a step back, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had experienced. Her mind raced as she processed his words. She had been burned before. She had loved him with everything she had, and in return she had been left feeling empty, abandoned. The doubts that still lingered in the corners of her mind screamed at her to walk away, to protect herself from further pain. But then, there was the man standing in front of her, with tears in his eyes and a sincerity that reached deep into her soul. What was love, if not the ability to believe again? Amira closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm within her. Her heart wanted to forgive. Her heart wanted to believe. But her mind was still scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of giving him her heart, only to watch it break once more. Jackson could see the inner turmoil in her eyes. He could see the battle waging in her heart, and he knew that he was the one who had caused it. He couldn't erase the past, but he could prove to her that the future could be different. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. But what I am asking is for a chance, just one chance, to show you that I'm the man you fell in love with, that I can be the man you need me to be." His words hung in the air between them, but it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the love behind them. The love that was genuine, raw and deep. The love that wasn't just for moments of happiness, but for every day, every trial, every challenge. The kind of love that weathered storms and came out stronger on the other side. Amira looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, she saw something she had almost forgotten existed in her heart. Hope. Her heart ached with the truth of what she had always known deep down. Love was not just about grand gestures. It wasn't about perfection. It was about growth. It was about change. It was about showing up every day, choosing each other even when it was hard. For the first time in a long time, Amira realized that she wasn't asking for perfection. She wasn't asking for things to go back to the way they were. She was asking for progress, for change, for a future built on trust, consistency, and love. "I don't need grand gestures, Jackson," Amira said softly, her voice steady now, the storm within her heart beginning to calm. "I just need you to choose me every single day. I need to see you fight for me, for us, not just when you're afraid of losing me, but when it's hard, when things get tough, when life isn't perfect." Jackson's eyes filled with tears as he nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "I will, Amira. I will choose you every single day, and I will prove it to you, not with words, but with my actions, every day for the rest of my life." For the first time in a long while, Amira felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't a promise that everything would be easy. She knew there would be hard days ahead, moments when their love would be tested, but she also knew that love, true love, wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to grow, to fight, and to never give up on each other. She stepped forward, her hands reaching for his, her heart finally able to believe again. "Okay, Jackson," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Let's build this, together." Jackson smiled through his tears, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight. It wasn't the end of their journey, it was only the beginning. They had both learned the hardest lesson of all. Love was not a perfect thing, but love, when nurtured, when fought for, could heal even the deepest wounds. And in that moment, as they held each other, they both knew, this time they would make it work. Together. Healing wasn't something that could be rushed. It wasn't a single grand gesture or a quick fix. It was a journey, a road that Jackson knew would take time, patience, and most of all, consistent effort. He had broken her trust, and now it was up to him to rebuild it, piece by fragile piece. He understood that this wouldn't be easy, but he was committed to proving, not just to her, but to himself as well, that he was worthy of her love. Each day, Jackson worked tirelessly to show Amira that he had changed. He had shifted his priorities, making her the center of his life once more. The work he had once drowned himself in took a back seat, and Amira found herself laughing with him again, sharing moments that felt like they were their first. At first, Amira was cautious, hesitant. She had been burned before, and the scars of the past were still fresh on her heart. But slowly, as Jackson kept his promises, as he showed up for her in small but meaningful ways, she began to trust him again. Not blindly, not recklessly, but cautiously, as someone who had been hurt once and was slowly finding their way back. There were moments when Amira would catch herself smiling, really smiling, at the way he held her hand, the way he remembered her favorite flowers, the way he asked her opinion on decisions that had nothing to do with work. He was making an effort, and it was all she had ever wanted. They went on dates again. Their first dinner date, so simple but so meaningful, felt like the first time they had truly connected. There was no rush to make things perfect. They didn't need perfection. They just needed to feel the warmth between them again. One evening, they found themselves sitting on a rooftop overlooking the city lights. They were wrapped in blankets, sharing stories about their childhood, their dreams, and their fears. Laughter filled the air as Jackson clumsily tried to make Amira laugh by doing impressions of their friends. The sound of her laughter was a melody he hadn't heard in so long. It was the sound of hope, of love being reborn. For the first time in months, Amira felt the weight of the past lift slightly. This felt real. The way he made her feel special, the way he truly listened, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. It was all beginning to feel like the love she had once known. She had started to believe, bit by bit, that maybe they could get back to what they once were. Or even better than that. This time, there were no distractions, no excuses. This time, Jackson was fully present, fully hers. One night, after a quiet dinner, they stood together on the balcony, the cool breeze tousling Amira's hair. The city was alive with movement below them, but it was the stillness between them that felt the most intimate. Jackson reached for her hand, his fingers brushing gently over hers. His eyes met hers, soft yet full of intent. There was a vulnerability in his gaze, a tenderness that had never been there before. "Amira," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly with emotion, "will you marry me again?" The words hit her like a wave, sweeping over her, overwhelming her. This wasn't just a question. It was the culmination of everything they had been through. The tears, the pain, the healing. It was the promise that he would never take her for granted again, that he would never let her go. Tears filled Amira's eyes as she looked at him. The road they had walked to get to this point was long, full of ups and downs, but it had led her here, back to him, back to love, back to the man who had found his way back to her heart. This time, she knew. She knew that Jackson had changed. He had truly fought for their love, not with empty words or fleeting gestures, but with his actions. He had earned her trust again, piece by piece, until it felt whole once more. She knew that he wouldn't repeat the same mistakes, that his commitment wasn't just for the moment, it was for the future. I don't need to think about it," Amira breathed, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, Jackson. 1,000 times, yes." In that moment, with the city lights twinkling in the distance and the soft rhythm of their hearts beating in sync, Jackson held Amira close. They had weathered the storm together, and now they were ready to begin a new chapter. It was a chapter built on trust, love, and the understanding that no relationship was perfect, but with commitment and dedication, anything was possible. Together, they were stronger. Together, they could face whatever came their way. And as Amira looked into Jackson's eyes, she knew that no matter what life had in store, they would be ready to face it, together. The second wedding was everything they had dreamed of, but in a way, it was even more special than the first. It wasn't grand, wasn't filled with extravagant decorations or a lavish guest list. It was simple, intimate, and brimming with the kind of love that had been earned over time, through heartache, through growth, and through a commitment to never give up on each other. Amira stood in front of Jackson, the soft glow of the setting sun casting a warm light across her face. She was breathtaking, as beautiful as the first day he had met her. But there was something different now. She wasn't just beautiful on the outside. She was stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. And Jackson, he looked at her with a depth of admiration, of gratitude, and of love that he had never known before. The ceremony was small, just close family and a few friends who had been there through the difficult times, but in that moment, surrounded by those who truly mattered, it felt like the entire universe had conspired to bring them together. When they exchanged their vows, Amira's voice was steady, though her heart was full. "Jackson, I've loved you through the highs and lows, the joy and the pain. You showed me that love isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. I promise to stand by you no matter what, because I know we can face anything together."